Moscow woke up in the dark. The Shatura power plant was burning. The Ryazan refinery was shut down. Ukrainian drones were slicing straight through layers of S-300 and Pantsir defenses that were supposed to protect the capital. Meanwhile, Trump talks about peace, but Ukraine has completely changed the game. It is bypassing the front lines and hitting the vital nerves of the Russian state. And the worst part for the Kremlin is not the fire. It is the internal collapse. Military trains halted, 700,000 railway workers in silent revolt, and a president locked inside a bunker. Today, you are going to see why this moment may be the most dangerous since 1917. The attack on the Shatura thermal power plant was not a lucky strike. The facility sits about 120 kilometers from the Kremlin, at the heart of the network that keeps Moscow lit and heated. To hit that target, Ukrainian drones had to cross multiple layers of air defense specifically designed to prevent exactly this, and they still made it through. And this is where the story changes scale. Shatura is a critical plant because it provides power and heat to hundreds of thousands of residents. In the middle of a Russian winter, when temperatures drop to 15 degrees below zero, heating is not comfort. It is survival. When the generators were hit, entire neighborhoods were thrown into darkness. Families were left without heat, without hot water, without electricity. And Moscow realized this was not symbolic. It was vulnerable. But the greatest humiliation did not come from the flames. It came from the question echoing through the corridors of the Kremlin. How did those drones get this far without being intercepted? Russia invested billions into S-300 systems, Pantsir batteries, Nebo radar, and electronic warfare networks. All of it supposedly creating an impenetrable shield around the capital. But Ukraine exploited exactly what those systems cannot detect. Small targets, flying low, with minimal thermal signatures on unpredictable routes. And when repair crews rushed in to contain the damage, something even worse happened. The double strike, a second wave of drones hitting the technicians as they assessed the destruction. This not only expanded the physical damage, but also prolonged the power outage for days. It was a clear message. You cannot fix anything unless we decide to let you. This pattern of coordinated attacks, designed to break infrastructure and morale at the same time, is what is paralyzing Moscow. Ukraine's strategy now follows a clear doctrine. Do not fight where the enemy is strong. Strike where he cannot defend himself. Russia has superiority in manpower, artillery, armored vehicles, and conventional ammunition. In the trenches, their numbers win through attrition. But far from the front line, deep inside Russia's own infrastructure, Ukraine has found the perfect blind spot. And that is why the Ryazan refinery, one of the country's largest and most advanced, became a priority target. Ryazan processes hundreds of thousands of barrels per day and supplies both the Moscow region and entire flanks of Russia's military operations in Ukraine. When it goes down, it is not just fuel that stops. Ammunition, logistics, transport, and even the ruble itself are affected. The Russian economy depends heavily on refined petroleum products to maintain fiscal stability. Cutting that flow is like cutting the ventilation of a patient already in critical condition. And the key issue is this. Refineries are not easy to repair. A single cracking tower or hydrogenation unit can take months to bring back online. But the true Ukrainian brilliance lies in the secondary effect of these strikes: energy blindness. Without power, radar stations go offline. Without power, S-400 batteries shift into a degraded mode. Without power, command centers rely on improvised generators that cannot sustain 24/7 operations. The air defense network that is supposed to protect Moscow simply does not function when the electricity goes out. It is like shutting off the lights in a stadium before the game starts. The team may be on the field, but no one can see anything. And for the first time since the Second World War, ordinary citizens in Moscow felt real fear. People in the capital grew up believing Moscow was impenetrable, armored, protected. When the lights went out and the cold seeped through the windows, the message was unmistakable. They are no longer untouchable. The psychological impact of this is devastating. Propaganda can yell, "Victory!" But when the refrigerator is off and the apartment is at 8 degrees Celsius, no one believes what the TV is saying. The Kremlin tried to respond to the strikes by releasing footage of Putin inspecting military operations. But everything in that video said the opposite. The spotless camouflage uniform, the padded walls, the hollow echo in the room. Nothing resembled a forward command post. It was clearly an underground bunker, designed to protect, not to lead. For Russians, the image conveyed the exact opposite of what the Kremlin wanted: a president hiding, afraid of his own sky. The war had come so close to Moscow that even Putin had to lock himself underground. This symbolism is devastating because it shatters the regime's most valuable narrative: the strong leader. The man who once filmed himself riding horses, flying fighter jets, diving in submarines, now appears sitting, pale, buried beneath the earth, speaking to generals who also seem detached from reality. Meanwhile, soldiers are freezing to death in the trenches. The psychological distance between Putin and the front has never been more obvious. He discusses maps and reports inside fortified rooms, while brigade commanders complain about lacking thermal clothing, ammunition, and even fuel. The elite lives as if the war were a board game. For those fighting it, it is an ongoing funeral. And when those videos of Putin in the bunker circulate through the Russian internet, the contrast with Zelensky becomes even harsher. Zelensky shows up drinking tea with soldiers, sitting in shattered shelters, walking through snow beside marksmen, visiting brigades under bombardment. The images are not glamorous, and that is exactly why they work. They convey truth, danger, presence. They convey leadership. For the Russian public, the comparison is unavoidable. On one side, a president in hiding. On the other, a leader who shares the danger with his men. This is where Putin's aura of invincibility starts to crack. Not because of destroyed tanks, but because the public perception has shifted. A leader who fears his own population is not strong. He is vulnerable. Russia has always been a railway empire. Unlike Europe or the United States, which expanded through highways, Russia only functions because its rail lines connect everything: coal from Siberia, steel from the Urals, grain from the south, fuel from the refineries, tanks and ammunition for the war. Without the railways, the country literally stops. And that is why what is happening inside RZD, Russian railways, is so dangerous for the Kremlin. 700,000 employees have, in recent weeks, entered a kind of silent revolt. It is not an official strike. It is something worse. Workers who simply stopped making the system work. It started with delayed wages, which would already be serious. But the real collapse comes from the sanctions. With no access to Western components, RZD is trying to keep 40-year-old locomotives running with improvised parts, recycled scrap, and emergency repairs. The result? Trains break down, run late, derail, or simply sit idle because there is nothing to replace the parts that fail. And the domino effect is brutal. When a train stops in Siberia, coal does not reach the power plants. When a train stops in the Urals, tanks do not reach Ukraine. When a train stops in Ryazan, fuel does not reach the brigades. The country is so vast that any disruption turns into a logistical avalanche, and Ukraine understands this perfectly, which is why its strikes prioritize infrastructure and refineries. Every explosion multiplies the chaos on the rails. But the Kremlin fears something even greater. The strike no one declares, but everyone carries out. It is passive sabotage. It is the locomotive driver slowing down just a little. It is the engineer who could not find the part. It is the technician who needs 2 more days to assess the problem. None of them is openly protesting. They just let the system rot. And in a country where 80% of logistics depend on rail, a movement like this does not just cripple the army. It cripples the state. Because if the trains stop, the war stops. And if the war stops, fear begins to spread inside the Kremlin and across Russian society. In Russia, there is an old concept, repeated every time the country enters a crisis: the war between the TV and the refrigerator. On one side, the television, the propaganda machine, always saying everything is under control, that Russia is advancing, that the West is collapsing. On the other side, the refrigerator, the reality inside people's homes. And today, the refrigerator is winning. Russian history shows that collapses do not begin with ideology, but with basic needs. In 1917, the Tsar did not fall because of revolutionary speeches. He fell because there was no bread and no coal. The country was freezing while the government insisted everything was fine. The same pattern resurfaced in the Soviet war in Afghanistan and again in 1991, when the country simply imploded because it could no longer sustain its own population. And now, in 2025, the same ghost is appearing again. When Moscow is left without power, without heat, without functioning transport, the Kremlin's narrative loses its grip. Ordinary citizens do not believe in military victory while sitting in an apartment at 8 degrees Celsius, listening to drones explode around the city. This is the breaking of the Russian social contract. For decades, the deal was simple. You stay out of politics and we guarantee stability and security. But today, the state guarantees nothing. Not warmth, not light, not protection, not transport, not visible leadership, only a president hiding in a bunker. When the refrigerator beats the TV, loyalty evaporates. And authoritarian regimes do not fall when the opposition grows. They fall when the population stops believing in fear. If the refrigerator has defeated the television inside Russia, outside its borders, another battle is unfolding. This time among allies who see the danger in completely different ways. In Washington, especially within Trump's circle, the buzzword is peace. The supposed plan to end the war quickly sounds at first glance reasonable. Freeze the conflict, suspend strikes, and force Ukraine and Russia to negotiate. And Putin pretends to be interested. He smiles, promises dialogue, poses as a statesman. But it is theatre, because for him, a ceasefire right now is pure gold. It buys time to rearm, rebuild missile stockpiles, reorganize brigades, and regain economic breath. The ones who do not buy into that illusion are the Europeans, especially Poland, Finland, and the Baltic states. They have lived with Russia at their doorstep for decades and know exactly what a ceasefire means. A stronger Russia 2 years from now, aiming at NATO as its next target. For Warsaw and Vilnius, stopping the war now is repeating 2014, giving the Kremlin room to breathe and come back even more aggressive later. The uncomfortable truth for the West is that today's Russia is not negotiating peace. It is in multiple organ failure: military, economic, energy, and political. Everything is collapsing at the same time. Saving Moscow now with a ceasefire would repeat the same mistake that kept Soviet regimes alive in the past. Europe understands this. Ukraine understands this. And every drone that falls on Moscow makes it clear that the only real path to stability is letting Russia face the consequences of its own war. At this point, the war has slipped completely out of Putin's control. The external front is stalled, but the internal front, the one that truly sustains the regime, is collapsing piece by piece. Energy, logistics, the economy, morale, leadership, everything is failing at the same time. And while Ukraine turns intelligence and precision into strategic weapons, the Kremlin hides in underground rooms trying to keep the illusion of strength alive. But the question facing Russians is simple and brutal. Is it worth freezing in the dark for a man hiding in a bunker? And if you think Russia's situation cannot get any worse, wait until you see what is happening with the tanks they are resurrecting from the scrapyard and sending straight to the front. The story is so absurd it sounds like fiction. But it is happening right now. Click the video here on the side and stay with me for this analysis.